participation. You've been waiting for more Irenaeus. We've already done 2 videos on him, and today I'm going to get back to him and get back to a couple of ideas that aren't just clear at first. You have to read Irenaeus a lot to sort of figure out some of his assumptions, and I think once you get these, he's much more digestible, much more helpful. Now, we've talked in the past about what he thinks it means to be a man, and that's his language, the ancient concept of man as human. So what does it mean to be human? And we gave an example of like apples. How do you know something is an apple? Well, it participates in what it means to be apple. That's a very philosophically abstract way of explaining it. And I don't think Irenaeus is at all primarily thinking in that philosophical way, but that is just sort of part of the thought world that he belongs to. So I needed to belabor that point. But now we get back to what he thinks it means to be human, and that's important because what does it mean to be a saved human? Is it just our body? See, what parts are we made up of? No, it's the whole of us. But now, that key word I use, participate. You know this is an apple because it participates in what it means to be apple. You know that I am a man or a human because I participate in what it means to be human. We're getting back to that. So today we're going to start here in this video by clarifying what he is assuming about the concept of participation, which again sounds like such an abstract idea, but don't worry, he's got very concrete examples that I think will help you get how this works. Now, before I do it, one more thing about the text itself. We did this in the first video on Irenaeus. I'm going to actually show you that clip without the cut out parts so that you can sort of compare and contrast your option for getting into this text, and then we'll get back into that concept of participation, communion, and all that that means for our salvation. Okay, well, as I say, I'm excited to talk to you about Irenaeus this morning, and I want to set up a little bit about what you're actually reading, because I had you read two versions of this same text. So his text, Against the Heresies, is collected in that series, the Ante-Nicene Fathers. It's a very old, wooden, tough translation, but it's one of the best English translations still. There's only been one other, and it makes it. Some things are better and some things are not. So I had you read that one to start with. But then there's a very thin book by Hans Urs von Balthasar that's just really helpful, that gives you sections, sort of, best one-liners sort of thing out of Irenaeus, his highlights. And this is a book I'd recommend if you're ever interested in Irenaeus, start here. It's just so easy and digestible. But then once you've gotten the hang of reading Irenaeus in a class like this, you can read Irenaeus on your own. It's just that starting is incredibly difficult, and I just thought I'd show you a little bit as to why. This is the critical edition. This is the critical edition.
This is not all of it. I can't pick it all up. This and 2 more volumes is the entire critical edition of Irenaeus' work Against the Heresies. It's a French editor, so it does come with a French translation, but I thought I'd just show you a page of it and see what you're up against in studying this text. So here is the Latin. I know you really can't see it, but you can see the layout. Irenaeus' text was written in Greek, and sadly it is lost to us except for a Latin translation. And if you've ever seen like a critical edition of the Bible, like a Greek New Testament, it has all of the critical apparatus below that. And then on the other side is the French translation, for those of you who can read French. And then at the bottom left on every page, your editor has done the difficult work of reconstructing what the original Greek probably said. He just knows his language that well, he can do that. And on the far bottom right, there are the surviving fragments of the original Greek. Meaning, if Irenaeus was quoted by another Greek writer, we have enough of those. He's quoted so much because he's so influential. You can piece together a lot of what he said and therefore reconstruct the whole of the Greek, but this is always a educated guess. So you do this sort of work, and it takes 10 volumes, literally, of all that I just showed you, just to get through Irenaeus' text, and that's why until just a few years ago, there wasn't another English translation of Irenaeus' text. It's incredibly difficult work. And then when you get into his text, you have to read all the extra things he says about these heretics who have long since died and gone away, and no one cares about them
anymore. So that's why it's much easier to get the little Reader's Digest version that we turn to for the second part of your reading. By the way, I didn't show you this last time, but Hans Urs von Balthasar is a phenomenal scholar. He did the same thing for Origen. So if you're interested in Origen, who we talked about last time, the title of this book is Spirit and Fire, and you can see this is a little bit thicker of a book, but that's because he's a big. He did this first, and he's a big fan of Origen. But it's the same sort of thing. If you want to cut through the extra stuff in Origen and get to his writings in a thematic way, this author has taken from all his different writings and put his sort of best quotes together for that. Okay, That's background as to the text itself. Let's jump in now to talk about the kind of key issues that Irenaeus is dealing with. Participation is a very common idea, except that in Irenaeus and in the Church Fathers, it takes on a very special, it works in a special way, and it's very foreign to how we think. So I'm going to make sure you get this. I need 5 minutes of your attention, because this is going to show up again and again and again in what you read and what comes afterward. So the nice thing is Irenaeus gives us some very specific examples, and I'll just tell you about these, and if you'd like to go back and reread them, you can look at them on your own. But a couple of examples he gives is on page 101, and he talks about, first he talks about a sponge and water. Now you all know how that works. You take a sponge, and a sponge, remember, is technically a solid. You drop this solid object into a bucket of water, which is a liquid, and what happens? Irenaeus thinks the sponge participates in the liquid, the water, right? Even though it's solid and the water is liquid, one can participate in another. The sponge is infused with water. It soaks up water. And here's the analogy. In this analogy, you are the sponge and God is the water. Kind of like your baptism. You are to be immersed into God. Your baptism was a sign of what you should do in the Spirit of God. You, the sponge, your body and soul, should soak up as much of God as you can get into you. Okay? Now it's true, your body, and in some enmeshed way, your soul, is material. And God is immaterial. You are flesh, God is spirit, and yet, just like a solid sponge can participate in a liquid water, you, material, body, in some way soul, can participate in immaterial Spirit of God. Got it? Soak up as much of God as you can. That's analogy number one. I'll give you a couple more. Analogy number two is he uses a torch and light. Let me make it real plain with an olive oil lamp. Oh, look, I have one right here. This is a very, very tiny olive oil lamp that came from Nazareth. You know how this works. You fill it with oil, and then you have a little wick that goes in here. But I'm not talking about the lamp. I want to talk about the fire that's going to happen when I light the end of this wick, right? If you were to light this wick, if it's a good wick, right, made of like holistic stuff, it actually never burns. Did you know that? Because what happens is the fuel, the oil inside the lamp, is transfused up the wick, and it is the fuel that is burning. The wick is never consumed, unless you blow it out, and then it just chars on the end there because it's no longer burning. But the point being, you, in this analogy, are the wick. You are a solid, and you are to soak up the oil, kind of like when you were anointed after your baptism in the ancient church. You would receive the chrismation. So you are the solid wick being soaked up, having soaked into you the liquid oil. And you should soak up as much of that as you can. And in this analogy, you're the wick, God is the oil. The Spirit of God is to fill you, to infuse you, and you're to be set on fire for the Lord. And like the burning bush, you'll not be consumed. Right? Okay? Solid wick, liquid oil, your material, God is immaterial, yet you can participate in God. Another analogy he uses is light, and that's not quite as solid and helpful, but lots of church fathers use it, so I've just mentioned it. If I were to shut the windows and turn off all the lights in my room, it would go dark. You wouldn't be able to see anything. There would still be air in the room. Yes, hopefully so. I would still be able to breathe. The air would still be here, but there would be no light in it if I blocked out all light. Then let's imagine I flipped on the light. Now the air is infused with and filled with the light, so much so that you cannot hardly distinguish the two. They are distinct, and yet one is completely infused with the other. So God is often likened to light, the burning bush, the pillar of fire by night, etc., etc. So God's light from heaven should fill you like the light from the sun fills the air. That's why the angels who stand before the throne of God are so bright when they come to earth, because they've been soaking up the Shekinah glory of God. And Moses stands before God on Sinai and his face begins to glow. You are supposed to soak up, participate in the light of God. One last analogy I'll give you and then we can be done. He uses the example of an olive tree. And this is really weird because we don't grow olives. So he talks about a wild olive tree versus a domesticated olive tree. And all you need to know is the wild is bitter and tastes bad. Domesticated is sweet, tastes good. What he says is you can graft a branch from this wild olive tree into this domesticated olive tree, the trunk of the tree. My wife is actually a master gardener. I've checked this out. She told me that you can take, this would be easier for us to follow, a plum branch, cut that plum branch off the plum tree, and then take it to an apple tree. Gash a hole in the tree trunk, jam that plum branch into the apple tree, gum it up, prop it up, wait for spring. What's going to happen? This branch is going to participate in this apple tree. The sap coming up from the ground is going to infuse this apple tree. The light that's brought into its leaves, this photosynthesis is going to take place. It's also going to be infused into this plum branch that's participating in an apple tree. And do you know what kind of fruit this plum branch will grow? Apples. I mean, that's like witchcraft, right? That's like blew my mind when I heard this, but it's real. Check it out. The apple tree can have engrafted into it a plum branch, and the plum branch participates in what it means to be an apple tree. So Jesus is the vine, you are the branches, you are to be grafted into the people of God and participate in what it means to be a person of God. You are to soak up from Christ the nutrients, et cetera, and bear fruits of the Spirit because of it. Not your own natural fruits, but you see what you participate in. The word, by the way, for participation is koinonia. So we often translate that as fellowship, or in Latin, communio. So communion. So you'll see why Irenaeus thinks Eucharist is so important, because that is a way that you can tangibly, physically, materially participate in God and soak up more of God. It also happens through prayers. It also happens through spiritual disciplines. It happens through all the things that Christ gives us to follow him. In all these ways, we are participating ontologically, like not just, we're not just joining hands singing Kumbaya together, participating, not that kind of koinonia. We are actually soaking up God into us, our flesh and our bones. And one day, if we do this long enough, we will radiate with the glory of God. Welcome back to my home office. Sorry, in these videos we've been jumping back and forth, but as I said, I had things there that I wanted to share, things that I don't have here, so we made it work. That idea, though, of participation is such a common idea among early Christian writers that if you can get it, if you can sort of see how it works for Irenaeus, it'll start to explain a lot of other things in Irenaeus' works and a lot of things in concepts that you find throughout the early church. So thanks for sticking with that. When we come back, we're going to see another, in the next video, Irenaeus is going to talk more about what it means to be human. What are we made of, body, soul, spirit? How do those elements participate in one another? And most importantly, how do we participate in God? Because he wants us to do so tangibly, materially, not just gnostically, not just in a matter of our minds or gnosis. That's what the heretics think. He thinks that we can participate in God in concrete ways, in things like the Lord's Supper or Eucharist. So you won't want to miss that next video. That's where we'll wrap up all of this in Irenaeus' thought. So I'll see you next time.